Speak on the show, episode 8 is year 2021, Black History Month. Today, changing the narrative, scientific racism, Tuskegee Experiment, after the fact, and the mind, body, and soul segment. Let's go. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Speak on the Show. I am your boy, R.W. Coolins. Saturday morning, y'all. Saturday morning, early Saturday morning. How's everybody doing out there? Good show for you. But first and foremost, giving honor to the God who allows me to come at you in this manner on a weekly basis. It's been a long but a short month, y'all. Been a long but a short month. We ended tomorrow. 1st of March is here. Spring's around the corner. Get ready to set the clocks with spring forward in the next couple of weeks. So got a lot of things, a lot of changes and everything. But we're going to get into some information today that's going to hopefully get us back on track, get us where we need to get to, and keep us moving in the right direction. So R.W. Coolins. rwcoolins.com. That's the website. You can go there. All the links for everything on social media are in that one location. Trying to steer everybody to the webpage. You know, I paid a penny for that webpage. So I want everybody to go to the webpage, follow through the webpage. If you want to go to the YouTube links and things like that, go to the rwcoolins.com. Follow there. Good morning, Russell Jenkins. Good morning. Appreciate the support. Good morning, April Whedon. Morning, sis. Appreciate the support. D-Cam, good morning, my brother. Good morning, my brother. Appreciate the support. So, like I said, I'm steering everybody to the rwcoolins.com website. Go there, click on the links there to go through. I think I need to add to Facebook. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it in a while either, just like y'all haven't gone there either. But we're gonna make this happen. We're gonna make this happen. Also, right now we're broadcasting live on YouTube and Facebook this morning. We're broadcasting live. You can also listen to the show after the fact on audio through Spreaker.com as well as Apple iTunes. You can go both of those places. Maurice Wigfall, appreciate the support, bro. Good morning. Appreciate the support. So you can follow, go through those locations to get the audio, listen to it after the fact. If you don't want to see all this, you can go there and listen to it after the show. They'll be there on those platforms. Call in number 844-904-2665. That's 844-904-2665. No matter what the situation is, let your voice be heard. Say what you mean what you say. If you call in or if you got a comment that you're going to post, as you see people posting good morning, if you got a post you want to put up, say good morning or whatever, or if you want to join in the show, feel free anytime during the show. Faye Jackson, good morning, man. Appreciate the support. So, this is the last weekend of Black History Month, and we're going into and that we celebrated on a large scale. Let's just be honest about this. This is the last weekend that we celebrated on a large scale per se. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this up today. And if you've seen the topics we're going to touch on, one of the main ones is going to be the Tuskegee Experiment. A lot of people know about it. A lot of people heard about it, but I'm going to give you some details. And I got this straight from the History Channel. Let's just be real. I went straight to the History Channel. I looked at some different sites and everything, but I went to the History Channel to make sure that I give you the facts specifically, and I compared them to the other places where I went. But this is where the information that I'm going to present to you today came from. Plain and simple, cut and dry, no ifs, no ands, no buts. Let's go and get into this show. Changing the narrative. I don't know why I got feedback in my ear. Changing the narrative. Now, I'm going to start off with this. I've been watching the news lately, like I always do, trying to find out what's going on in the world. And in the news, I've noticed that the narrative is starting to change. They're starting to change the narrative as far as the Capitol insurrection. And they're changing the narrative to not be an insurrection, but to call it a riot. They're changing the narrative to make it seem like it wasn't as bad as we actually seen, and the optics and everything else of the insurrection. What happened, the police officers, how they were overrun, the ones that died or committed suicide after the fact because of what happened, all the things that have gone on with this insurrection, they're trying to change the narrative. And the narrative is being changed not within the media. Well, let me take that back. The media is playing a part in it, but the narrative is being changed by the politicians that be, specifically on the Republican side. Now, I don't know if you're a Republican, Democrat, don't care. Whatever you are, you are. But the narrative being changed about what is going on or what happened during this time of this insurrection doesn't sit well with me. And it shouldn't sit well with you either. Because here's the thing, and I've said this many times on the show, and I'm going to continue saying it. When we talk about Colin Kaepernick and how they hijacked the narrative on what he was doing, they changed the narrative from being a good thing, a good protest, a peaceful protest, to being something that they vilified, made him through vitriol, all the different things you can think of that they talked about with Colin Kaepernick, where they changed the narrative of what he was doing about the oppression of his people, of a people. And then you have this insurrection on the Capitol, which was terrorism in its greatest form. Let's just be real. But they're trying to change the narrative to just say it was a riot. It was just a riot. And it was all being set up at the time when this impeachment was going on. And if everybody paid attention, that's what they were doing at the time. Do not allow this to happen. We need to stay cognizant. We need to stay abreast. We need to keep watching and keep listening to who's being charged, who's not being charged, who played a part. And then they're trying to push back. And then I'm gonna get off this, but they're trying to push back on creating a commission about the insurrection like they did for 9/11. When they did the big investigation, find out what went on 9/11, what they could have done better, all those different things. Well, they're trying to downplay the fact that they don't really need this type of commission for this insurrection. So on the Republican side, I heard Mitch McConnell say that if they decide to do this, if the Democrats decide to push this, then they're going to want to do the commission on all the marches and the protests that went on this summer in the George Floyd and everything else that was going on this summer. Let them do it. Let them investigate it. Let them do the commission on it all, because I guarantee once they do the commission, they're going to find more fault on the side of the insurrection than they will on the protest and what the protests were all about. See, when you start throwing out threats of what you want done after the fact, and you start throwing out threats of, well, if you want to look at this, let us look at this, there's something going on. There's something truly going on, and they don't want to get to the bottom of it. Good morning, Michelle Long. Appreciate the support. Good morning, Michelle Long. Appreciate the support. But that's where I'm at with the narrative on the insurrection at the Capitol. Now, my next one, changing the narrative. I have a little, sorry about that. I have a clip that I want to play for you. It's Dr. Fauci. He was on the Readout with Joy Reid the other day. And he was talking about the vaccine. What's going on with the vaccine, with the African-American community, people of color who don't want to take it, all those different things. So I'm going to play this because what he did was, it leads into what we're going to talk about today. But what he did was he brought up the fact of the Tuskegee Experiment and why the African-American people of color community are hesitant to take it. And he tried to dispel some of the rumors and tried to come in and make people more comfortable about what's going on with the vaccine. So let me get into this. Let me play this and then we'll be right back. So there you have it. It's Dr. Fauci on the readout yesterday, on an interview with Joy Reid on MSNBC. And basically what he broke down, and I mean, it was, in the beginning, there was a African-American older gentleman who asked a question about why should we feel comfortable getting the vaccine? And that's where Dr. Fauci went in to break it down exactly where it comes from. And it's not a government thing. It's coming through the medical and all this kind of stuff. And he even mentioned, as I said, the Tuskegee Experiment, which a lot of people are hesitant about taking the vaccine because of what happened during that time. So he wanted to make people comfortable to know that this vaccine isn't labeled black or white or black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It has no labels on it to say that these specific people need to get this vaccine. The vaccine is consistent across the board, everything like that. But people are still going to be skeptical. And now we're going to get into the reason why and go into some history for Black History Month of the Tuskegee Experiment and how this came to be. So let's go into this scientific racism. In 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution formally ended the enslavement of Black Americans. But by the early 20th century, the cultural and medical landscape of the U.S. was still built upon and inundated with racist concepts. Social Darwinism was rising, predicated on the survival of the fittest, and scientific racism. A pseudo-scientific practice of using science to reinforce racial biases was common. Many white people already thought themselves superior to Blacks, and science and medicine was all too happy to reinforce this hierarchy. So what they're saying here is back in 1865, right when the ratification of the 13th Amendment was put into play, you already had this idea that Blacks were less than, people of color were less than, racial biases, and then they went into this scientific racism to try to prove their point. This is where it all started back in 1865, so we're going to get into all this. Good morning, William Hill. Appreciate the support, bro. Appreciate support. It says violins. I think he meant Collins, but that's all right. That's all right. But here we go. Before the ending of slavery, scientific racism was used to justify the African slave trade. Scientists argued that African men were uniquely fit for enslavement due to their physical strength and simple minds. They argued that slaves possessed primitive nervous systems, so did not experience pain as white people did. Enslaved African Americans in the South were claimed to suffer from mental illness at rates lower than their free Northern counterparts, thereby proving that enslavement was good for them. And slaves who ran away were said to be suffering from their own mental illness known as drapetomania. By trying to escape, they had diagnosed them per se as having drapetomania because they wanted to get out of slavery. These are all things that the scientific racism comes into play for us to lead into the Tuskegee Experiment. During and after the American Civil War, African Americans were argued to be a different species. Now, here's where it gets interesting. A different species from white Americans. And mixed race children were presumed prone to many medical issues. Doctors of the time testified that the emancipation of slaves had caused the mental, moral, and physical deterioration of the Black population. Observing that virtually free of diseases as slaves, they were now overwhelmed by it. Many believed that the African Americans were doomed to extinction, and arguments were made about their physiology being unsuited for the colder climates of America. Thus, they should be returned to Africa. So that's where that misperception comes in that Black folks don't like cold weather. That we can't deal with cold weather. And this was something that back then when they were doing this experiment of the difference between Black folks and white folks, they came up with this thing saying that, we were different. Our bodies were different. Our mindsets were different. Because of slavery, our psyche was different. All these things came into play with this experiment that they tried to say and try to figure out during this scientific racism. And here we go. Scientific and medical authorities of the late 19th, early 20th centuries held extremely harmful pseudo-scientific ideas specifically about sex drives and genitals of African Americans. It was widely believed that, watch this now, while the brains of African Americans were under-evolved, their genitals were overdeveloped. Black men were seen to have an intrinsic perversion for white women. And all African Americans were seen as inherently immoral with insatiable sexual appetites. This all matters because it was with this understandings of race, sexuality, and health that researchers undertook the Tuskegee study, Tuskegee Experiment. They believed, largely due to their fundamentally flawed scientific understanding of race, that Black people were extremely prone to sexually transmitted infections like syphilis. Low birth rates and high miscarriage rates were universally blamed on sexually transmitted infections. They also believed that all Black people, regardless of their education background, economic, or personal situations, could not be convinced to get treatment for syphilis. Thus, the United States Public Health Service could justify the Tuskegee Experiment, calling it a study in nature, rather than an experiment meant to simply observe the natural progression of syphilis within a community that wouldn't seek treatment. So I kind of ran those together. They wanted to call it a Tuskegee study in the beginning rather than an experiment because they said it was a study in nature. So play on words is something they try to do as well. It leads up to that. So when I'm reading this scientific racism, what I'm getting you to understand is this was the basis of what they based the Tuskegee Experiment on. What they thought about the difference in genetics and everything with Black folks and us not being able to, fight off diseases like syphilis and things like that. So they went in and did this. Good morning, El Harwell. Appreciate the support. The Public Health Service set their study in Macon County due to estimates that 35% of its population was infected with syphilis. Scientific racism, that's where it all started. Scientific racism goes all the way back to 1865, as I just mentioned. So from 1865 and the ratification of the 13th Amendment all the way up through before they started the Tuskegee Experiment, which started in 1932, there's this misperception about how the Black body works, how the Black body functions, how it fights off diseases and things like that. So they figured they would do not a study, but an experiment to find out if we could fight it off, what they could do to cure it. Basically, and this is going to sound kind of harsh, but it's no different than, and I guess they've evolved. They evolved at the time. But if you remember back in the 70s and 80s, they used to do, testing on animals, lab rats and monkeys and all that kind of stuff. Well, in their minds, they evolved from testing the African-American males and family members with this syphilis and Tuskegee Experiment to doing animals. Just keep it simple. This is what it evolved to in their eyes and what they were trying to do as far as trying to figure out how these things work. Scientific racism. Now let's get into the Tuskegee Experiment that leads into this. The Tuskegee Experiment began in 1932, at a time when there was no known treatment for syphilis, a contagious venereal disease. After being recruited by the promise of free medical care, 600 African-American men in Macon County, Alabama, were enrolled in the project, which aimed to study the full progression of the disease. The age of these men were between the ages of 25 and 60. Wide range, 25 to 60 African-American males. The participants were primarily sharecroppers, and many have never visited a doctor. Doctors from the Public Health Service, which was running this study, informed the participants, 399 men with latent syphilis and a control group of 200 others who were free of the disease. They were being treated for bad blood, a term commonly used in the area at the time to refer to a variety of ailments. So back in the day, the way they were able to get these men to come into this experiment, even though they were hesitant at the time, they told them that they were being treated for bad blood. Bad blood back then could have covered a whole gamut of different ailments that they had in their bodies. So they called it bad blood to make them feel like and make them comfortable in the fact to think that they were treating them for something that they already had, which in fact, as we'll find out, they were not treating them. They were injecting them and continuing to let it progress to see if they could come up with some type of a cure. And they were testing on African-American males. Good morning, Brian Hoodie. Appreciate the support. Appreciate the support. The more I read this, the more I wonder, where was the compassion, the empathy, the sympathy, or any of those things you can think about that I always say, the thieves, the THYs. When it came to people of non-color feeling the need or feeling or having no feeling, when they decided to do these experiments on people. Because understand, a human being is a human being. No matter what the pigmentation is, melanin content, none of that kind of stuff, what would want or what would cause someone to want to do these tests on people and kind of change the narrative of what they're doing the test for to make you comfortable in doing the test, when they never had your best interest at hand with what they were doing. And they used people, African-American people, who were coming out of slavery, who were coming out of those times where they were thought to be less than, and making them feel as though they were doing something to help them along. And then when we have these things that go on in our generation now, and what we've seen as our growth and we evolve, is that our untrust of the systems that are in place. And as many people have said, you cannot beat or change a system that was not put in place for you. But when you read these things about how the system manipulated and took advantage of people, all for the fact of testing and not for the fact of trying to solve anything, but for the fact of the torture, let's just be real, and the suffering to see how it acted on a body, which in this body, let's just be honest, that they felt was different than theirs. So no matter what it did to the body of the African-American males that they were testing on, or anybody like that, they were never going to find out truly how it affected them, because in their minds, we weren't the same. But they still chose to do these tests. L. Harwell, please read The Bell Curve, 1994, Intelligence and Class Structure Between Black and White in America, based on its ITs and genes. And that's what it comes down to. Thanks for the information. I pulled that up. But these are the things that when we sit back as African Americans, and we sometimes will ask, and I know I'm guilty of it. I ask myself sometimes, and I'm sure some of you out there do too, but am I paranoid about some of the things that go on around me that I feel are against me? Am I paranoid to think that some things are just not for me? Is there a certain paranoia that goes along with our experiences? Or is it not paranoia, but is it a fact of life that we've had to deal with? Because to say paranoid means you think it might happen, but it won't. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's just my definition of it. But when you go into things, and we go into what we feel should be done and way we should be treated, and you see these things through history on how manipulation and changing narratives and for personal gain of certain people comes into the point where we, myself included, we have a certain level of paranoia about the things that go on around us. And then you have to ask yourself, can that and has that caused us as a people to stunt our growth within this country? Or is it a combination of stunting our growth by the paranoia because of the lack of being able to grow because of the systems that are in place against us, or the systems that never had us included in when they were made? Because I don't like to use the word paranoia, but it comes into play when we talk about this. When you talk about being paranoid, it comes into play with this, because I think in some instances, we have to look at the big picture and be honest with ourselves, that when we look at ourselves in this time and look at the things that have happened over time, there's going to be a certain sense of paranoia, being paranoid about what someone may do to you. I mean, let's just be real. When we see the George Floyds and the Trayvon Martins and the Oh, Sandra Bland, you know, when we see these incidents happen, we get paranoid per se when the cops pull up and turn on the lights behind us. Because I don't like to use the word fear, because fear has never been associated with our faith. And I don't use fear and paranoid in the same context for me. It's just something that makes you think. It's something that you have to look at. And when we talk about our history and we talk about the things that have been done over history to us as a people, and I've talked about this before, where we hear people say, "Oh, get over it." Well, you can't get over something that is still continuing. You can't get over something that is still continuing on to this day. It just doesn't happen. It's not that easy. But I digress. Let me get back to the Tuskegee experiment. Researchers faced a lack of participants due to fears that the physical examinations were actually for the purpose of recruiting them to the military. Because of these fears, doctors began examining women and children as well to give them a comfort, to make them feel comfortable that it was not something that they were doing disingenuous. Men diagnosed with syphilis who were of the appropriate age were recruited for the study for their syphilis. At the time, they were commonly using mercury. They were injecting them with mercury to make them feel that they were getting something they actually weren't, something to cure them. In 1933, researchers decided to continue the study long term. They also began giving all patients ineffective medicines, as I mentioned, ointments or capsules with small doses to further the belief that they were being treated. Manipulating, deception, lies. As time progressed, however, patients began to stop attending their appointments. They stopped going. To greater incentivize them to remain a part of the study, the Public Health Service hired a nurse named Eunice Rivers to drive them to and from their appointments, provide them with hot meals, and deliver their medicines, services especially valuable to subjects during the Great Depression. So they had someone start driving them to their appointments because they weren't going voluntarily. So they had somebody pick them up, and in conjunction with picking them up, they were feeding them. They were making them feel good about themselves. You know, all the things that you see happen over time where they put you in a comfort zone of being around them, that they have your best interests at hand. In an effort to ensure the autopsies of their test subjects, the researchers also began covering patients, watch this now, funeral expenses. Let me read that one more time. In an effort to ensure the autopsies of their test subjects, the researchers also began covering the patient's funeral expenses. So when a person passed away during this experiment, while they were in the trial, in the experiment, they said, well, you know what? We'll go ahead and pay for the funeral expenses, which gave them the opportunity to do autopsies on the bodies without the family even knowing about it. So they could do more research while you're on your deathbed or after you've passed, per se on the slab, for them to further do more research on your body that they were injecting you with a disease that caused your health to deteriorate. Multiple times throughout the experiment, researchers actively worked to ensure that their subjects did not receive treatment for syphilis. In 1934, they provided doctors in Macon County with lists of their subjects and asked them not to treat them. In 1940, they did the same with the Alabama Health Department. In 1941, many of the men were drafted and had their syphilis uncovered by the entrance medical exam. So the researchers had the men removed from the Army rather than let their syphilis be treated. You go to serve your country. You sign up for the military. You go and do your physical, the normal process of a physical, and they find out that you have syphilis. And rather than them treat the syphilis that you have and not allow you to serve your country as you chose to do, they don't allow you to serve your country because you have syphilis. They send you back to where you came from, where they injected you with the syphilis and it has gone untreated, and send you back there to die from the disease that they could have treated at any time that they wanted to. So twofold, they're killing you. And in the process of killing you, where they could have cured you, they're not allowing you to serve your country and have a better way of life at that time for yourself. We're talking about 1940s. Who does this? The government. Public Health Service. It was in these moments that the Tuskegee study's true nature became clear. Rather than simply observing and documenting the natural progression of syphilis in the community as had been planned, the researchers intervened, first by telling the participants that they were being treated, which was a lie, and then again by preventing their participants from seeking treatment that could save their lives. Thus, the original basis for the study, that the people of Macon County would likely not seek treatment and thus could be observed as their syphilis progressed, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Henderson Act was passed in 1943, requiring tests and treatments for venereal diseases to be publicly funded. And by 1947, penicillin had become the standard treatment for syphilis, prompting the Public Health Service to open several rapid treatment centers specifically to treat syphilis with penicillin. All the while, they were actively preventing 399 men from receiving the same treatments. They opened up these centers specifically to cure venereal diseases, and the 399 men who they were studying with these diseases, they prevented them from getting the treatment or receiving the penicillin. By 1952, however, about 30% of the participants had received penicillin anyway, despite the researchers' best efforts. Regardless, the Public Health Service argued that the participants wouldn't seek penicillin or stick to the prescribed treatment plans. They claimed that their participants, all Black men, were too stoic. They were too stoic to visit a doctor. In truth, these men thought they were already being treated, so why would they seek out further treatment from a doctor? So they were telling them that they were being treated, so why would they have to go see another doctor to be treated? You know, back in the day, and even today, when we talk about health, it's very rare, very, very rare for us as people of color to get a second opinion. It's very rare for us to question a doctor and go ask or be diagnosed by another doctor. We're hesitant to do that because it's just us. First of all, let's just be honest, a lot of us don't like going to the doctor. So going to two doctors to find out the same answer, a lot of us won't do. It's something we need to be cognizant of, something we need to be, start doing. If you're not sure, if you're not comfortable with one doctor, go get another doctor. But don't allow someone to tell you to treating you for something and are doing something completely opposite of what you need to be done. This is what was happening back in 1952. The researchers' tune changed again as time went on. In 1965, they argued that it was too late to give the subjects penicillin as their syphilis had progressed too far for the drug to help. While a convenient justification for the continuation of the study, penicillin is and was recommended for all ages or for all stages of syphilis and could have stopped the disease's progression in the patients. In 1947, and we're going back again, the Nuremberg Code was written, and in 1964, the World Health Organization published their Declaration of Helsinki. Now, this was during Nuremberg when they were testing Jews during the Holocaust and all that kind of stuff. Both aimed to protect humans from experimentation. But despite this, the Center for Disease Control, which had taken over for the Public Health Service, actively decided to continue the study as late as 1969. Now, one thing that I didn't mention in the beginning, this study started in 1932. 1932. It didn't finally end until 1972. 1972, 40 years. 40 years this Tuskegee experiment was going on. And the reason I say it was going on by what I've read is in that time, no one was still aware of it. And I'm getting ready to get into this. But in 1972, Peter Buxton leaked information about the study to the New York Times, and the paper published it on the front page on November 16th, 1972. 40 years. 40 years and nobody's raised a flag on this experiment. Nobody has raised a flag on the people that are dying. Nobody's raising a flag on the fact that they're giving people a disease and they're not treating it. 40 years before somebody blew the whistle. And that's when it ended, was when it was published on the front page. By this time, watch this now, only 74 of the test subjects were still alive. Out of 399, only 74 of the actual people, African-American males between the age of 25 to 60, were still alive. 128 patients had died of syphilis or its complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children had acquired congenital syphilis. A whole community. A whole community. With no thoughts of curing them, no thoughts of taking care of them, no thoughts of their livelihood, no thoughts of them being human. Just an experiment. Let's just see. Let's just, I'm not even going to go there. There was a mass public outrage, and the National Association for the NAACP launched a class action lawsuit against the Public Health Service. It settled the suit 2 years later for $10 million. $10 million for 40 years of suffering, and agreed to pay the medical treatments of all surviving participants, and infected family members. The last person who died from this experiment was in 2009. The last participant of the 399 they initially put in this program, in this experiment, passed in 2004. So 2004 was the last person that actually was in the experiment. 2009 was the person that died that was a offspring of someone in the experiment. This is 2021. 2009. A family member of someone involved in this experiment passed away from an experiment that lasted for 40 years. And we wonder why. Well, we don't, but people wonder why. When you talk about the system, as I said before, when you talk about the vaccine, as Dr. Fauci mentioned, you see why people are hesitant to take the government, who was the ones that were initiating this Tuskegee experiment. You wonder why people are hesitant when the government played a role in everything that went on with the Tuskegee experiment for 40 years. And the only reason it was found out because a reporter happened to stumble across the information because he worked for the New York Times and published it on the front page news. And now something has to be done. What if he never found that information? What if that information was not found by this reporter? Then what? Now what? What would we be talking about right now? Would the Tuskegee experiment still be going on in a different form? Who knows? Who knows? After the fact, In 1973, Congress held hearings on the Tuskegee Experiment. And the following year, the study's surviving participants, along with the heirs of those who died, received a $10 million out-of-court settlement, which is what the NAACP was fighting for. Additionally, new guidelines were issued to protect human subjects in U.S. government-funded research projects. As a result of the Tuskegee Experiment, many African Americans developed a lingering, deep mistrust of public health officials and vaccines. Case in point. In part to foster racial healing, President Bill Clinton issued a 1997 apology stating, and this is what it says: the United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. It is not only in remembering that shameful past that we can make amends and repair our nation, but it is in remembering that past that we can build a better present and a better future. During his apology, Clinton announced plans for the establishment of the Tuskegee University National Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare. 40 years. People suffered for 40 years. And I'm going to digress for a minute with this, because is it mentioned in here that the NAACP fought this and they settled out of court for $10 million. But my question would be, when are we going to be tired, and when are we going to be sick and tired of people throwing money at a continuing problem? When are we going to get to a point where we don't want the money? We want the inclusion. We want to be looked at as equal. We want the systems to be rewritten, rechanged, reestablished to include those who were excluded from the beginning. Sometimes I think we get comfortable with the monetary value that they put on our heads when these things go wrong. And not that they go wrong, but when it's discovered that wrong is being done. They throw money at it. Everything does not have monetary value. No matter how rich, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, no matter how rich you are on the face of this earth, it still is not going to get you in VIP seating in heaven or hell, depending on where you're going. That's not for me to judge. But there is no VIP seating. There is nothing when you get to those pearly gates where they're going to ask you for a W-2 or what your income is or anything like that. But we get caught up in the monetary value of our lives. And when people throw money at us to make a problem go away, we get comfortable. And we get so comfortable that if we're not being paid for what we've been suffering from, we feel injustice is being done. Where the conversation needs to be retracted to the fact that the injustice was done before the monetary value came into play. But we've gotten to a point where we get so comfortable with how much we're going to get paid for the suffering that we don't get to the root cause of why the suffering happened. Money is not the cure for what has gone on to us as a people. When I hear people talk about reparations for slavery, the question I ask is, what is it going to solve at this point? We talk about, and I know the mindset is that if we were able to get reparations, it would help us get and start building our generational wealth to get to the point of where we can be comfortable and our generations after us can be comfortable with that wealth that we may establish. But the question I will ask is, how much money do you think you're going to get in reparations that's going to make you and your family that comfortable? I see, and we see in the news, when our people are killed at the hands of police officers. And the police officers go to trial, or they won't go to trial, they get acquitted before the trial comes up, all the different things we see. And then they go and do a civil suit because they want to put a monetary value on the person who the police killed to make them feel better. The person is not coming back because of the money. And I understand the fact that we monetize everything. But My question would be, if we're going to monetize it, then monetize it to the point of what that person would have, how that person would have succeeded in life. What would his total gain in life would have been if you choose to put a monetary value on it. Because if you change it to that narrative, you really can't, because you don't know what heights that person would have risen to as far as success. But when they throw money at it, it's to make it feel better. 40 years of suffering. 40 years of suffering for 399 people, or 600 total. 600 total men in the experiment, not to include the number of people in their families, to include children, wives, generational, and to throw money at it. $10 million lawsuit. In 2010, then President Barack Obama and other federal officials apologized for another, watch this now, for another U.S.-sponsored experiment conducted decades earlier in Guatemala. In that study from 1946 to 1948, now mind you, I told you this started in 1932, the Tuskegee Experiment. This experiment was from 1946 to 1948 in Guatemala. Nearly 700 men and women who were prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients were intentionally infected with syphilis. Hundreds more people were exposed to other sexually transmitted diseases as part of the study without their knowledge or their consent. The purpose of the study was to determine whether penicillin could prevent, not just cure, syphilis infection. Some of those who became infected never received medical treatment. The results of the study, which took place with the cooperation of Guatemalan government officials, were never published. The American public health researcher in charge of the project, Dr. John Cutler, went on to become, watch this now, a lead researcher in the Tuskegee Experiment. Following Cutler's death in 2003, historian Susan Reverby uncovered the records of the Guatemala experiments while doing research related to the Tuskegee Experiment. She shared her findings with U.S. government officials in 2010. Soon afterward, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius issued an apology for the STD study, and President Obama called the Guatemalan president to apologize for the experiments. What is it what is the mindset when you have a race of people who have a mindset that they are superior, and because they're superior, they feel they can do anything and everything to another race of people, and then at the same time be unapologetic about what they've done through the processes? And then we ask ourselves over and over again, when will things change? This was in 1932. Went for 40 years to 1972. I was born in 1966. So for 6 years, this was going on during my lifetime. During my parents' lifetime, it was going on. This does not go back far. But the scientific racism goes back and is what it was predicated on. And it still holds true today. The difference is that it's not a scientific per se racism that is being used. It is a mindset, as I mentioned last week with racism. When you talk about it, why are we the ones that need to figure out what we're going to do to stop it and change it? It was built off the backs of people who found a difference and chose to manipulate that difference to the full extent. Not a difference in who we are as mankind, but only the small difference of our melanin content. and at the time where we came from. And even to this day, we still deal with these same manipulatory practices, far and abroad. I mean, near and far. I was trying to sound educated and I messed up. But these are the things that, as Dr. Fauci mentioned in that first clip I played, where we question everything. We question a lot of things that deal with us, especially when it comes to our health and our well-being, which we should. But then we get questioned on why we feel this way. Well, if people would look at history, it tells you why. And people, you have some people that ask, well, it's not happening to you now. No, it's not happening to me now. But what's to say it can't and it won't continue to happen to someone after me? Or who's to say it's not happening to me, just in a different form? And that's when I'll get into that part where I said changing the narrative, changing the practices, changing the processes. Change. As much as we want to see change as far as how we're treated, trust and believe me when I tell you that people who don't have your best interest at hand are also looking to change the way they go about affecting your livelihood. It's just a change. Change is for good, but change can also be for bad, depending on who and why the change is being made. Let's get into this mind, body, and soul. Mind, body, and soul. 2021, y'all. We said this year was going to be a year of taking it one day at a time. We're also working on self-help. Self-love, self-help, self-improvement. And with this Tuskegee experiment that we talked about today and the vaccine, there's a lot of people that got a lot of questions with this vaccine. You're not going to be able to squash everyone's hesitancies, but you have to get to the point where you make yourself comfortable by doing your research, reading the things that you need to read, and understanding that no matter what goes on, no matter how these things come at you, God is still in control. But you have to do your due diligence to make the right decisions when you come up upon something that you're questioning. Mind, body, and soul segment. Here we go. When you know what you know, take the time to pass it on. Knowledge unshared is of no use to anyone, not even you. Let me read that again. When you know what you know, take the time to pass it on. Knowledge unshared is of no use to anyone, not even you. In life, we grow and we evolve. We try to learn things as we come to lessons. Life lessons is what we learn. And during this month of Black History Month, I've given you the Black Panther Party, what happened with the Black Panther Party. I've talked about the Tuskegee Experiment, and I also talked about the 1619 Project, all these things during Black History Month. But as I've mentioned many times before, it's not just about learning these things for 28 or 29 days. These are things that we should know and understand and be able to articulate it and speak to other folks about what we know and what knowledge we have gained from reading the facts of these situations. If you're walking around and you're like a Encyclopedia Britannica, a lot of people don't remember that Encyclopedia Britannica back in the day, there'd been big books about that wide. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But if you're walking around like an Encyclopedia Britannica and you have all this knowledge of certain things or knowledge of different experiences that have gone on or the history of us as a people, and you choose or don't take the time to share that information that you know, that knowledge that you know, where you got it from, who you got it from, where you read it at, and you do not pass it on, not only generation to generation, but person to person, to give someone else the understanding of what's going on around them and why these things happen, What started the chain of events to be where they're at now? When you walk around with that knowledge and you choose not to share it, is it truly knowledge? Because in order for, in my opinion, for it to be knowledge, you have to be able to share that with someone for them to comprehend what what you're bringing to the table. But if you choose to keep that knowledge here and not share it from here, is it knowledge? Or is it just the fact that you know something that someone else doesn't? We have to get to a point, we have to get comfortable with sharing our successes, sharing our trials, sharing our tribulations, sharing what we know to be true about our life experiences, so the next generation and the people around you. And, when we come to opening businesses and talking about how we gain, wealth or any of those things, passing that knowledge on, not holding it back, because when you hold it back, it's not knowledge anymore. Understanding and knowing what you know is a gift. It's a gift bestowed upon you to be able to find information, to be able to retain information, and have an educated conversation about what you know. But something that's always been said, and I'm a true believer in this: if you are the smartest person in the room, you probably need to find you another room. If you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find you another room. Because if you have that much knowledge and the people in that room with you cannot even comprehend what knowledge you have, or you're sharing, or you're not sharing rather than telling, you need to find you another room. Find you another room to be able to talk to people on the same level or same understanding as you, to make you feel and make you understand that you may know something, but you damn sure don't know everything. And the knowledge that you do have, if you choose not to share it, it's not knowledge. As far as I'm concerned, it's not knowledge. You just know something. That's it. These are the things that we need to get better at. These are the things within our community we need to be more comfortable with. These are the things that within our own community, that when we interact with each other on a daily basis, have the conversations that not only make people comfortable to talk to you, but get people to understand that to share knowledge with each other helps all of us grow. Helps all of us grow. Don't be worried about, you may tell somebody something and they run off with it, because bottom line is, if you tell someone something, an idea that you may have or a plan that you may have, and they run off with it, it's not about you. That says more about them. Don't be scared or afraid to pass on the knowledge that you have, to give someone else the knowledge that they may need. Share. Understanding. We can't do this individually. This is a collective effort in order for us to get to the point of where we want to be. And it doesn't have to be something that we're asking somebody for. It should be something that we're building together in our communities. Share the knowledge, y'all. Share the knowledge. Let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's the end of the 28, 29 days that we celebrate Black history. But I'm going to tell you, I will continue celebrating Black history every day, because I'm a Black man. And what I found out about myself is, the more things that I read about our history and what has gone on through history, like I said, and I'm gonna digress here for a minute, but like I mentioned before we started into Black History Month, I'm not going to get into, who invented what, who did this, who did that, the first of this, the first of that. We hear that all the time. I wanted to touch on things that we hear about that people may skim over. People may need to know more about. Those are the things that I think we all need to start paying more attention to. Go and learn the things about the struggle, not just the Harriet Tubman freed slaves. And she said, if I would have freed more people if they'd have realized they were slaves. I get that. But what about the things and the transgressions that have been done to us that nobody ever talks about? The things you need to know, because sometimes history repeats itself. And in order to be prepared for what history may repeat itself, you got to know where it started. Like we're running around now, and I mentioned it with Dr. Fauci with this vaccine, and people are hesitant to get the vaccine because of the unknowing. This is something new. And we're thinking that, they're going to have bottles labeled black, white, Asian, all those different things. The bottle is labeled vaccine. And here's the other part that I put on that, and you can ride with me on this, or you can get off the train when I pull up to the next stop. With this vaccine, and with the people that decide to take the vaccine, I'm not telling you to take it. I'm not telling you not to take it. But I'm trying to get you to see the bigger view of what's going to happen if the people take the vaccine. We can try to get back to some sense of normalcy. The longer we hesitate to take the vaccine, the longer we're going to be in this limbo period that we've been in for a year. It's been a year that things have shut down. It's been a year since we started wearing masks and not being able to go here, not being able to go, not being able to travel and everything. When do we get to a point where we understand that there's certain sacrifices that we need to make, not as only individuals, but as a community and as a people around the world, to realize that in order for us to all get back to some sense of normalcy and get off of this superiority mindset that I'm better than them and I should be able to get the shot first and all this, I don't care who gets the shot first, just get the damn shot. Because the main people who were arguing about wearing the mask and not being able to travel, and they're shutting the government down and all this stuff, are the main ones feeling that they should be obligated to get the shot first. Think about that. You didn't want to do the small steps, but you want to go to the head of the line for the major step. As a community and as a brother in your community, I'm encouraging each and every one of you, get the vaccine. Do your research. Do your research. Read. Stop listening to everything what everybody else says and go and read for yourself what you need to know about the vaccine before you go get it. Look at your health conditions. Look at everything that's going on with you, because understand something. 500,000 people have lost their lives due to this pandemic. How many more do we need to lose before we come to the point and the realization that it's time for us to start using the medicines that were developed for this pandemic so we can continue living our lives with some sense of normalcy? I'm not here to preach, I'm here to teach. And the teaching moment in this is, as an individual, do your due diligence and research what you need to research about the vaccine. On the other part is, as a member of a community, as a member of a family, as a member of this society, make the decision not only for the individual, but for the masses. We all have to make sacrifices at some times. Why not start with this? That's all I'm saying. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I'll be back again next week working on some guests. We're going to have some guests on. We're going to be talking about some things. Straight talk, no chaser. You know, that's what I try to do. rwcoolins.com. That's the website. Also, merchandise is on the website. Go get your t-shirts. It's starting to get warm out there. You can put your short sleeves on. You can go back outside, wear the t-shirts proudly, display for the show. Like I said, I appreciate everybody tuning in. And hey, if nobody's told you recently, I love all y'all. And there's nothing you can do about it. And I appreciate everybody for supporting me while I'm doing this show. I love coming on every Saturday morning and passing on the knowledge, because like I said in the Mind, Body, and Soul segment, if I have the knowledge and I choose not to share it, it's not knowledge. I just know something that you don't know. I love y'all. As I always say before I sign off, love yourself, love one another, keep your head up, and most definitely, Keep your faith in God. He's always in control. I love y'all, and I'll holler at y'all next week. Peace.